Welcome, David. Welcome to WP Chennai. And for all the other people, David actually works with WP Engine, and today he's going to be talking about Gutenberg blocks. So, David, welcome again, and the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, Sudhar. Thank you all for attending. What I'm going to talk to you today about is this presentation around Rock Your Blocks, and particularly focusing on this notion of web design acceleration, and specifically really how to leverage how you also can leverage the block editor essentially to build better sites faster. For those unfamiliar with me, I'm on the senior leadership team at WP Engine, where I lead WordPress ecosystem strategy, and I also lead the Genesis business unit inside WP Engine. Those unfamiliar with Genesis, it's a theme framework that was established about 10 years ago. I started my career in digital over 20 years ago, over that time leading teams building, growing, and scaling digital businesses, often with WordPress. Then I owned and operated an advanced WordPress and Genesis agency for 5 years. We had clients from single owner businesses all the way up to companies like WP Engine, Pioneer Electronics, and Esurance. So through the agency work, I've actually been supporting WP Engine for 9 years as an employee for 5. In order to talk about the block editor, I feel it's also important to understand how we got here and why here is important. Why is it important that the block editor was introduced, and what was the evolution that brought us to this point in time? So for those who have been following along, the block editor, Gutenberg, was introduced into WordPress core in 2018. If you were using WordPress and were involved with the community back then, you might remember that there was a lot of anxiety around the block editor being introduced into WordPress core, a lot of concern, a lot of doubt. And I'm happy to report nearly 2 years later that WordPress did not blow up. We're still all building with WordPress, and it was not the end of the world, as many thought, during the time leading up to the block editor being released in core. What we saw after that, of course, was updates to the block editor in every single release of WordPress since then. Things like fixing initial bugs, errors, bad experiences that were introduced in the initial launch, but of course also adding to those capabilities over time. Phase 1 of the block editor in WordPress core is essentially what we see today, where the block editor is used to build and design content in the body of posts and pages. Phase 2 of the block editor will be bringing the block editor of Gutenberg, will be bringing the block editor into the header and the sidebar and the footer. So instead of only doing the body, you're now able to leverage the block editor in all parts of a WordPress site. This is currently scheduled to come in December of 2020. There are beta capabilities available today if you want to start testing. Another thing to understand about full site editing is it's going to come with big changes to how themes are made. Now, your existing themes that you make in the way you make themes today will still work, and don't worry, when full site editing is released into core in late 2020. But if you want to build new themes for full site editing, they're called full site editing themes, there's some changes that are coming. One of the big changes is kind of moving away completely from a template file essentially into block template files. So that's a big distinction. With that also becomes the notion that themes really play more of a configuration role in WordPress in the future, meaning that it's still setting global styles, but one example is that many PHP functions that you can use in themes today will not be available in full site editing themes. And what this is doing is it's creating a forcing function where things, the way people have expressed things in themes today are essentially being pushed into plugins. Now, I know many of you might say, well, that's probably where it should have been to begin with. But the main headline there is that the block editor is being used in all parts of a WordPress site for the future version of WordPress sites, and the way you build themes is going to be much different. Now, the tools that you use to build them are likely changing and adopting for the new ways, but this is coming in late 2020. But I think the theme here is that the block editor is the absolute center of modern WordPress. There's zero doubt about that. And oh, by the way, the headshots on the right, these are the release leads of the block editor when it was released into core. This was actually one of the first releases where Matt Mullenweg wasn't the only release lead. And so this was a kind of a head nod, if you will, into the kind of impact and contributions from the community as a whole. But now that the block editor is center, we start to ask ourselves, well, why? Why did that happen? And of course, there's a lot of anxiety and doubt around some of these aspects. So if we look at what WordPress was before the block editor was introduced, in its default editing state, it really was for blogging. If we look at version 1.0 from 2003, the first version of WordPress created by Mike Little and Matt Mullenweg, and we look at version 4.9 right before the block editor was introduced as the default editing experience, it's almost the same. It's got a better design, it's laid out a little differently, but essentially it consists of a title and a post, and then the ability, body, if you will, and then the ability to sort of manipulate the visual aspects of that. I call this the Word doc for your website. And you can see the default editing experience had fundamentally not changed. 15 years, it did not change, huge. Now, of course, if you've been building with WordPress for a while, you know, well, hey, look, I can use a plugin like WooCommerce to add e-commerce, CMS experiences. I can use maybe a page builder plugin. So it wasn't like WordPress was only for blogging, but in its default editing state, it really was for blogging, in my view. And so what the block editor has brought to WordPress, in my view, is a modern editing experience, an experience that allows for ease of creation and also for scale and innovation. So as I think about the block editor, I think about it in three main areas. I think about it in the blocks that come with WordPress itself and the features available within there. I also think of things like block libraries. These might be things like plugins, like atomic blocks or co-blocks or cadence blocks. And then of course, also the tools that come with those kind of solutions that maybe enhance the block editor. And then finally, I think about the blocks that you might create yourself from scratch using React, using a framework like Create Gutenberg, or leveraging plugins that allow you to create blocks easily without having to know React. So the presentation today really focuses on these three key areas. So to kick things off, we're going to talk about the WordPress core blocks and the editor features within them. During this section, I'm going to be showing you the basics of how the block editor works. If you've been using the block editor extensively and you know this backwards and forwards, you're not going to see anything necessarily new in this section. But I think understanding how brands, agencies, and freelancers are leveraging blocks to accelerate their projects, to increase their profits per project if they're a freelancer or an agency, are important paradigms to understand as you think about your block strategy. So while you see some things you probably already know, I think it's important to understand how you might consider this relative to your strategy. And I'm going backwards for some reason. So let me try to go forward. There we go. Okay, so core blocks. So for the core blocks, I'm going to do a live demo. These are always stressful because you're always worried that something will go wrong. But for this live demo, I'm actually going to be using Local. It's a free local development tool. You can find it at localwp.com. And for this install, I know we often say hello world when we create something, but in this case, I wanted to say Vanakkam Chennai. So we'll go ahead and get WP admin spun up here. And what we'll do, I haven't really changed much about this instance of WordPress. It's pretty much a vanilla installation of WordPress, but we're going to do some things to it later that'll, I think, help illustrate the power, true power of blocks. So we'll go ahead and add a page here. Go over to my live demo script so I don't forget everything. I have that on this screen and then the live demo here. But as we see here, of course, this is much different than the classic editing experience. It's not a Word doc for my website anymore. It is rather a proper web page building interface. And the blocks, of course, are invoked by the plus sign here on the left. And as we see, there are blocks that are included with WordPress core itself. So again, no special plugins installed. This is all default WordPress. And what we have, of course, unlike the Word doc editing experience where I'm just typing things and bolding things and highlighting and making them, heading tags and so on and so forth, or of course, modifying the CSS, what we have here are now essentially components. One of my favorite components to demo core blocks is the column block. And the reason I like it is because in addition to adding a block to the page, it also adds some the notion of multiple blocks. As a matter of fact, there's a new feature set coming into WordPress core called block patterns that really embraces this. But for now, I'm just going to choose the 70-30 block. So 30% of the block space or the element space is on the left and 70% is on the right. Now here, maybe I want to do a maybe like a bio block or something that includes something about a person. So one thing I might is maybe want to include is an image. And I did modify the instance a little bit. I uploaded this picture to the media gallery there. There's my headshot. We'll go ahead and select that. And then for the 70% block area, I'm going to maybe add a heading. And I can maybe put my name there. And then I can add a paragraph. And then maybe I'll say, I got to get the spelling right, Sudar. Chennai. Hello world, hello Chennai. And as we see here, of course, that was very simple for me to make. And you might be thinking if you're an advanced developer, I didn't need the block editor to do that. I could have done that with WordPress. I could have, coded that in CSS. I could have in HTML. I could have made this without the block editor. And I think that's obviously true. And of course, we also use plugins and things to help us achieve similar outcomes before the block editor was native in core. But the speed at which I was able to create an element like this was, I think, really special. So as we think about advanced developers, and one of the negative piece of feedback people will give about the block editor is, well, I don't need these simple tools. I like my advanced way of doing it. And I think that's fair. But also, you need to consider the fact that everyone loves an easy button. Just because you can code it doesn't necessarily mean you should. I think advanced custom fields, ACF is a good example of this. Advanced developers can easily create custom fields, yet many advanced developers use ACF. Well, why do they do that? Because it's easy. So I think that the block editor really fundamentally represents this notion of an easy button. Now, of course, the other critique that the block editor received was that we're basically turning WordPress into Wix. Now, the reason people say that is because the editing experience is easier. I can come in here and very quickly change my colors without a lot of fanfare. I can add new blocks. I can arrange them. I can reorder them. This is a very Wix-like experience. But I fundamentally disagree with that observation. And the main reason is because essentially Wix and platforms like it are closed platforms. They're closed source, they're not as extensible, and they're not as customizable. WordPress, even with the block editor, now and in the future, is open. It is extensible via the REST API. It is customizable not only through HTML and CSS, but also through plugins. So you can add the functionality and capabilities that are specific to you. And just because the block editor introduces this notion of page building and ease in content creation for the web, that doesn't make it like something like Wix. And the analogy I like to give here is basically sharks and dolphins both have fins. They both have pectoral fins and dorsal fins, and they have those fins. I hear we see if someone not on mute. If you could mute yourself, that would be awesome.
Sorry, David. I'm gonna just.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. I'm working in a shed I converted into an office, so my kids would always run around on Zoom calls I was on. But they both have dorsal fins. And the reason they both have dorsal fins, or fins in general, despite them being fundamentally different animals, a shark is a fish and a dolphin is a mammal, but the reason why they both have fins is because that trait is beneficial in the environment in which they exist. They're beneficial for navigating in water, they're beneficial for helping the animal to survive. And in WordPress and in Wix and in every other content management system, we have this notion of needing to build modularized pages. And so the reason I fundamentally disagree with the comparison to Wix is because they're both systems for making web pages, but at their heart, they're fundamentally different things. They just both happen to have fins because fins are helpful. So I think the other thing to understand, of course, is that within the blocks, even if you want to, or if you want to provide advanced functionality and advanced capabilities and unique designs and approaches, you still have those capabilities. We can go into this particular block and edit the HTML, we can set classes, we can define styles with CSS, or we can just leverage the block as it is. And I'm going to actually show you some examples of this here in a second. So for the next part of the demonstration, my power is flickering, Sudar. I might have to dial back in on my hotspot here, but I think we'll be okay. Fingers crossed.
No issues there. Like if that happens, like we'll just wait. You could join in the same Zoom.
Yeah, I got it. I've got the hotspot ready to go on my phone. Okay, so for the next part of the presentation, this was really covering the notion of core blocks and the core capabilities within them. So there's a collection of blocks included with WordPress core. We also have the block directory on WordPress org now. We saw that we could, of course, modify the colors. We can modify in other settings within the blocks. We also, of course, saw that we can modify the style of the block via custom CSS. So now I want to talk about the second pillar of the block editor that I like to focus on, which are the block libraries. So these are generally blocks that are created by organizations outside of the WordPress core team. And so these are either companies or individuals that create collections of blocks that are usually delivered either through a theme, some sort of onboarding wizard, which I'll actually show a demo here, or perhaps in a separate plugin. So the plugins are typically things like the most popular are atomic blocks, co-blocks, cadence blocks, and there are others. In the Genesis context, for those again unfamiliar with Genesis, it's a theme framework. We include blocks in our themes. And so I'm going to show you an example of this for two reasons. One, if you're not comfortable with development, tools like this can be very helpful. If you're an advanced developer, I think this is good inspiration for how you would think about leveraging your own custom-built block libraries in your practice, whether as part of an internal team within a company, or if you're a freelancer agency. These approaches really represent what I consider to be a time machine. We're going to get in a time machine and we're going to propel ourselves forward in our project faster. A premium theme or a block library made by a company, that's their version of a time machine, which might be helpful to you or not. But you can also create your own time machine with WordPress by doing these types of approaches within your own business. And again, this is a key distinction between things like Wix and things like WordPress. You can't make your own custom version of those things. WordPress allows you to do that. And this is kind of a neat example. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to activate our Navigation Pro theme, which comes with pre-designed blocks, and we're going to see how that works. So as we activate the theme spins up an install wizard, a setup wizard that says basically, we're going to set up the demo content for you, and that's what the wizard does. And what it's asking me to do is to choose what kind of site I want to make. In our case, we chose cuisine, travel, fitness, so really focused around the topic of the site. But if you were making something like this on your own and you were in an agency, you might say e-commerce or blog or publisher or local business or whatever that starting point is for you that helps you do your job faster, basically your own custom time machine. But in our case, we chose the topic of the site. Sudhar, what's your favorite one? Which one should we choose? Travel, cuisine, fitness, law?
Travel, because that's something
Travel.
that we can't do right now, right?
Yes, yes. All right, well, let's install this pack. And this wizard is specific to Genesis. We will be actually releasing this in a free plugin in the future, so you can use this technique on your own workflows. Certainly, of course, you can use those themes. But again, there's all kinds of methods for approaching this within WordPress itself, including other plugins or just doing it yourself. I mean, we just dedicated development time to achieve this, so you could, of course, do the same. What the wizard has done is it's installed the plugins that the theme relies on. One of those plugins is Atomic Blocks, one of those premium block libraries I was talking about a minute ago. And then it's also loading in specific demo content for the theme, which includes blocks. And we're actually going to go play around with those blocks so you can actually see what I'm talking about. So that's it. We're all done. So now my vanilla version of WordPress is not vanilla anymore. It is full of beautiful pages and block-based demo content. All of the content you see here is editable via blocks. So this is what I mean by a time machine. Sudhar, you've installed a WordPress theme on your site. I don't know how long you've been working WordPress. I'm guessing it's been a while. But do you remember that feeling when you installed a theme and then you looked at your site and it looked nothing like the demo?
Yep. All the
Yeah, it's
time.
like, what happened? I call this the most disappointing experience on the internet. And a lot of theme providers have actually addressed this through wizards like the one you just saw here. But of course, now I have all of the demo content in my site. So if I'm not a developer, things like this are super helpful for me because it gives me a great starting point. And the block editor really extends that. If you are a developer, if you have strong development chops, imagine doing this for your client projects where you've set up your own kind of onboarding sequence for your internal team, so their starting point is much further ahead in the future. And again, all I had to do this was install one theme. Again, we have multiple pages here, but this page has no navigation, so I'm going to switch back because it's a landing page. But I'm going to show you editing blocks here on the pricing page. We'll talk a little bit more about some of this notion of premium blocks, custom blocks, and how you might leverage them as you work the block editor into your practice. So now I'm in the editing view, and as we see, of course, this looks very, very close to the front end of the website. Now, I do want to point out, though, this doesn't look exactly like the front end of the website. We don't have the navigation, we don't have the sidebar, we don't have the footer, and these are the experiences that will be added into WordPress in late 2020, in December 2020, which is currently the flagged release date for full site editing in WordPress core. And there's some other nuances why it doesn't look exactly like it, but it looks pretty darn close. So of course, in here, what we see are the blocks, and of course I can go in here as I'm building out my site and say, I don't know, maybe this is the pro plan and this is the free plan or something like that. So of course, as you can see, I have a great starting point as I start to build out a site for a particular purpose. Now, if I'm not a developer, again, I'm probably just using the text editing and the tools within the block editor itself. I can kind of move blocks up and down on the page. I can go into the block and maybe I want to highlight this particular product. I always like orange as a call to action color. I'm just going to kind of randomly pick a orange here. It looks good. Okay, maybe not good, but for the purpose of the demo, that's fine. So again, I can quickly come in here and edit this. Now, this particular block is interesting in this demo because if we go here to the block menu, I can actually scroll down here, and I mentioned how this theme automatically installed atomic blocks. So one of the atomic blocks, so atomic blocks is a plugin that comes with block sections and layouts, and I'll show you sections and layouts in a second, but these are some of the blocks that atomic blocks added. CoBlocks does something similar, cadence blocks. And so if I add this pricing block, it's the same block, it's a little different. Sudar, I'm sorry, Sudar, can you tell the difference in the blocks?
No, the only change I see is like the color changes that you made. But if you have not done that, I don't see any difference.
Exactly. And we didn't take this particular block that far with customizing it in the themes demo content, but you can see, of course, that the color was the primary thing that had changed. But we also see changes to the text as part of the way the theme is leveraging this block. So this was done via the templates with the block template for the block itself within the theme that applied custom styles to the block itself. So you can do this for core blocks. As a matter of fact, this theme does that. This theme leverages core blocks that it then also applies custom styles to. So we leverage in the themes, not sure why there we go. So we'll use these particular blocks and then apply custom styles to them. So that way when we have this time machine starting point, it's specific to that theme, it's specific to that design. Watching the time here, Sudar, I want to make sure I get all the good content in before we're done. So this is an example of how we leverage blocks in our themes to give our customers a kind of time machine that propels them forward in their project. Again, if you make everything from scratch, you also can use these capabilities to do the same for your business. Another feature coming into core that's really cool that I can kind of show you an example of here is essentially block patterns. Now, block patterns are collections of blocks that you might use as part of a page or even an entire page. And block patterns were actually inspired by this notion of layouts and sections within atomic blocks, which is what I'm showing you here. This is full inception, Sudar. Atomic blocks inspired block patterns, and now block patterns are going to be incorporating atomic blocks are going to now be incorporating block patterns. But let me show you how those work. So within the sections available within the Atomic Blocks plugin, and by the way, for those curious, we will be rebranding and expanding the Atomic Blocks plugin into a plugin we're calling Genesis Blocks. WP Engine acquired Atomic Blocks a couple of years ago. But it will be available for free on WordPress.org. But I want to show you a little bit about how it works. So sections are part of a page. You would think about it like the hero header, maybe a call to action, maybe a list of posts, those kind of things. So I'm just going to pick a section here. You can see I have a section that came with my theme here. So this is another thing that theme providers will be doing, is providing parts of their theme demo content available for you to use on demand on any page. But I'm going to go ahead and just choose my team members block. I don't know what's with Fran and her closed eyes picture here, but this one has always kind of bugged me a little bit in the demo content. But you can see this is actually multiple blocks. We have a heading block, a paragraph block, image blocks, and so on and so forth. And so by providing the ability to add a section of content, again, you're not just using blocks in this way in the demo content of a theme where it all loads in one go, but you're also able, particularly through block patterns and core and also through things like atomic blocks, to add a section of blocks to a page. And then another area that Atomic Blocks has, again, soon to be Genesis Blocks, is this notion of layouts. So this would be a whole page of content. And so we can go in here and basically do this and select that one. And we can go through, and this is an FAQ layout, and it's supposed to essentially represent an entire page of content. So as we think about the block editors, we think about this notion of web design acceleration. This is fundamentally what we mean, is that you're able to leverage the blocks themselves to build faster. Again, everyone likes an easy button. Nearly all animals in the ocean have fins. And so leveraging those capabilities in the environment in which we operate essentially allows you to get your work done faster. Now, the third area of blocks that I like to focus on is block creation. Sudar, have you created your own Gutenberg block yet?
Yep, I've created a couple of blocks, mostly using the create block helper which we have, right? So that, and then a couple of scaffolding tools and things like that.
Like, did you use Create Gutenberg?
Yep.
Yep, gotcha. So as you create custom blocks, and if you're curious about how to create them, the Gutenberg Block Editor Handbook that's available on WordPress.org has great documentation around block creation. To create a block from scratch, you have to learn at least a decent amount of React. And I know if you've been following WordPress for a while, a couple of years ago, WordCamp Philadelphia, Matt Mullenweg asked everyone to learn WordPress deeply. Sudhar, did you learn, or I'm sorry, JavaScript deeply. Sudhar, did you learn JavaScript deeply?
Yep. After that, I actually had to go and, I mean, like I've been doing web development for quite some time, but most of my JavaScript knowledge actually transferred into jQuery knowledge. So after that WordCamp, I actually had to go back, revisit my JavaScript skills, learn JavaScript, and then moved on to other frameworks.
Well, you are ahead of the curve because not a lot of people have learned JavaScript deeply. And so while there are frameworks like Create Gutenberg, which is incredible for learning how to build custom blocks, what we're also seeing in the ecosystem are plugins and tools that help you create custom blocks without the need to know React, without the need to know JavaScript deeply. ACF blocks is a really popular example of that. And then what I'm going to actually show you here is a plugin we're about to release on WordPress.org called Genesis Custom Blocks. Which also allows you to create plugins without knowing React. If you want to learn how to build it from scratch, you check out Create Gutenberg and the Block Editor Handbook. If you feel uncomfortable learning React or learning how to build it from scratch using JavaScript, then check out ACF blocks, and then you can check out custom blocks when we release it on WordPress.org. For this part of the demo, I'm going to use a video to show you how it works. I'm not going to talk through every frame in the video because it's actually quite long, but I'm going to use the play bar down here to kind of walk us through what the user is demoing in this particular video. So the block you see here was created 100% from scratch and was created with the skill sets that the typical WordPress developer would have today. So they haven't had to learn JavaScript deeply yet in order to achieve this. And I'm going to show you how it works as we scroll through the video. Okay, so the way that the user created the custom blocks with Genesis Custom Blocks is they installed the plugin, of course. The user is now showing us that it works with any theme. They're actually using the 2020 child theme. So despite it being called Genesis, it actually doesn't require the framework. Scroll through this part, and then the user is now within the plugin settings under all blocks and is going to add a new block in WP Admin using the WP Admin interface. The user then needs to name the block, so they can kind of name it anything they want. This is what the block will be titled when it shows up in the block editor dropdown. And then next, they're going to select an icon for the block. If you'll recall, in the block editor dropdown, there were icons available. You can also choose custom icons. And then the user is going to enter the keywords that the block is searched for within the block editor dropdown menu. So when you search for like paragraph or title or header, these are the keywords essentially that power that. Now, the user then needs to enter fields for the block. So if you'll remember from blocks, in the block example I showed with the column block, we essentially had the image, and then if I was making a custom block, maybe the name, and then the paragraph underneath it. And so the user has created the title field first, and is now creating a field called, let's see what it's called here. I forgot. Oh, the goal block. Now the user can also choose the field type. See that one right there. So is this a text field, text area, URL, email, number, color, image, select, so on and so forth. And this plugin is essentially translating all of this into React. So it abstracts out the hard parts of React, so you don't even have to really touch them. You can also choose the field location, the field width, the help text, the default value, so on and so forth. Now, essentially what the user does is this gentleman goes through and he adds all the fields that were necessary for building the custom block we saw on that first view. Once they're built, he then publishes the custom block. And we can see here we have essentially an error message that says to display this block, we need a template file for the block. Again, this is fairly standard WordPress developer skill sets here. So let's go ahead and create a template file for the block so we can get some styles associated with it. So for this, I'm going to go into, or the user's going to go into the editor. They're going to go under themes, the theme 2020. They're going to add a new file. You name the file blocks, new folder, name that campaign, which was the name of our block, and then add a file called block.php. This is where the user will define, there we go, add our CSS. And then we see that the error message has disappeared. The reason the error message disappeared was just because those files were created. We still haven't applied the CSS and so on and so forth to the block. So we're now in the block editor. So let's go ahead and see if our block exists, Sudar. Oops, I'm getting all weird with my. So we're going to see if the block exists. And sure enough, there it is, campaign, using the icon we selected and the title that we gave it. And here's the block within the editor. Now, of course, we can enter our information into the block for a text, our title, our image, our URL, our button text. And then now we're going to go back into our editor. Oops. This thing is tricky to play along with. And the user's adding the H3, all their div tags, adding the field values. And then essentially what the user can do after this is add their CSS to style the block and the elements within the block to match the design they're looking for. Again, not going to walk through all of these bits and bobs here. And so you can leverage you can build custom CSS to style the elements of the block and essentially have an output that looks like this. Another aspect to Genesis custom blocks that I didn't demo here is that you can additionally have the color settings, have the other inspector settings for the block itself within the inspector settings. So in other words, you can style with custom CSS, but you can also use the block editor settings to style the blocks you create with Genesis custom blocks. So I'm getting nearly exactly on time, Sudar. I like this. Let me skip through the video. Okay, so again, just to recap, as I think about the block editor strategy, I think about the WordPress core blocks and the editor features within them, how an easy button is helpful for everyone, but also how you can extend and customize the blocks within WordPress core to serve the purpose you need for the benefit and outcome that you're trying to drive. I think of block libraries as those time machines that propel you faster, forward faster, help you get to a further part of your project. Certainly, there are plugins that allow you to do this, but of course, you also can create your own block library to create your own time machine that's helpful for you. And then, of course, you can leverage that by using blocks from core, custom template files, or building your own custom blocks from scratch using Create Gutenberg framework or similar plugins like ACF blocks or plugins like Genesis custom blocks. So that's it, Sudhar. We're right at the 15-minute mark for Q&A. So I didn't hear you interrupt me. Does that mean there's no questions? Did I explain it all?
So there were a couple of questions, so but I thought we could wait till the end. That's the
Sure,
reason
sure.
why I didn't do it. So the one of the questions is the custom blocking that you demonstrated, right? So does it support repeating fields?
With Genesis custom blocks, the free version does not support repeating fields, but the pro version would. Genesis Custom Blocks was built by the team that built the plugin Block Lab, which basically does the same thing. So that team joined WP Engine, and then they're essentially winding down the Block Lab plugin and are using this, basically using essentially the same code base to create Genesis Custom Blocks. We're really excited that those folks joined these efforts for us. And in their model at Block Lab, it was the repeating fields were in the pro version. I think this is similar to how ACF makes the delineation between their pro and free features.
Okay, awesome. I'm actually very excited about this, because I have created a lot of blogs, but all of them are from scratch using React and other things, and this is really cool. So another related question is the block editor, the custom block editor that you showed, right? Does it support any CSS pre-processes like Sass or less or any of those things?
I believe so, but that's not something I'm personally familiar with. So unfortunately, I will have to delay that question, but I can find out the answer, and I'm gonna maybe I'll tweet it out. But unfortunately, I just don't know the answer.
Yeah, I think that should be fine. If you can just mention our uh, Twitter handle, I think we would be able to uh, get it. We would be able to follow that.
Yeah,
So
that's no problem. The reason I'm fairly confident it includes this is we do have those capabilities in other contexts within the Genesis universe, and the development team working on custom blocks is also working with the folks who'd worked on those other areas. So I believe that's true, but I need to definitively find out.
okay, so I'm gonna wait for a couple of more questions. So meanwhile, I personally have some questions after seeing this demo, right? So one of the first questions that I had was you were showing the demo where after the theme is installed, the theme there was this wizard where we were able to uh, get the demo content installed for the theme, right? And then you also mentioned that that is something that is done through a plugin, and then that plugin might be released and other things. Um, so I vaguely remember some theme, the WordPress theme guidelines where we are not supposed to have demo content and things like that. So do you have more ideas about it, more thoughts about it? Is it something that can be done only on a pro theme, which is not hosted on WordPress.org, or WordPress.org also allows us to have these wizards, but cannot automatically insert the demo content?
Yeah, so this particular theme is not distributed on WordPress.org.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't need to, abide, if you will, by the WordPress core guidelines. Doesn't make it a bad theme. It's just that WordPress org guidelines are, designed for themes that are distributed through that repo. And the decisions around what is allowed and not allowed are relevant. Are of course,
I think it's
really.
also mostly to make sure that there's an even ground, right? Everybody, otherwise, every theme might have its own demo content inserted, and it might look different. Probably they just want every theme to be have an even ground, another thing, possibly.
Yeah, I think that's likely true. Of course, keep in mind you can also distribute free themes that you don't distribute through WordPress.org. And then if you had, say, an agency or freelance business where you built your own theme as your own starting point, I know a lot of people do this. Of course, you can kind of do whatever you want. I think the other interesting aspect to this is I showed this as a demo of blocks included with a theme, but if you also recall, if we go, we'll add a new page and go back into that layout view. If you'll recall, the themes, blocks, and sections and layouts were included in this menu here.
Mhm.
Now, if I go to a layout, I mentioned how this is a whole page of content, essentially. I think I can actually just click that and it'll, yep, there it is. There's that whole page of content. So this was included in a plugin, not a theme. This was powered by Atomic Blocks plugin.
Mhm.
Now, one of the things we're going to be adding is we have sections which are part of the page, layouts which are a whole page. We're also going to introduce this notion of collections, where it's essentially a whole website full of demo content. So similar to how the theme wizard loaded it, it's almost identical, except that it's being loaded via the plugin. So I'm not sure the dynamics on .org themes versus like when should I have the demo content or not. But leveraging that within the plugin, you know, obviously is within those guidelines, and that's how you know, we will be introducing these capabilities for Genesis plugins and themes in the future.
Mhm.
And so that's how we're approaching it, is basically doing it through the plugin.
Okay, perfect. I think I'll probably be interested in that plugin as well, because I've seen a couple of themes where, uh, I mean, one of the main problems that you mentioned, right? So whenever we install a fresh theme, like how do we quickly, uh, like, you know, if we are evaluating a couple of themes, right? So you need some content to actually fully evaluate the theme. It's not just enough if you just install the theme. So what I generally do is, if I have to pick up from, like, you know, 5 or 6 themes, I have to create my own content and then install all the themes and then keep switching the themes to figure out like how I like each theme. But like the demo plugin that you had, right? So I think that would be very useful in those scenarios, because I could like easily set up 5 different installs and just use that plugin to quickly add the demo content and then check all those things.
Yeah, totally. I was helping a family member build out a site this past weekend, and that's pretty much what I did. I think I used a 2020 theme, and I loaded in some of these sections and layouts
Mhm.
just to get them going. It wasn't a very complicated site. I think another thing this is a really interesting question that comes up is, well, this layout has styles in it. My theme might have different styles. When in the Genesis community, we have a group called the Genesis Shapers, and they're like an advisory board of sorts, but they're people from all around the world with all different backgrounds and all different levels of, you know, skill. And we ask them, like, well, what should we do if we introduce this new feature, and what do you think about it? They tell us and give us guidance. And one of the things that we discussed in the last Shapers meeting was, well, when should the block win? When should the
Mhm.
styles be contained within the block, and when should the theme win? In other words, when should the block inherit the styles from the theme? And as you can imagine, there's a very contentious debate, like team blocks, team themes. And so generally, as we discussed it, there were a few nuances that came out. So in particular, with people making themes that they wanted to be distributed to others, like themes on WordPress.org, or maybe you're going to sell it on your website or whatever you're going to do with it. In those cases, the strong opinion was that the theme should win. And then in other cases, it was like, yeah, but maybe the theme styles look really terrible for the block. Like maybe the H2 style is like massive font for some reason. And in this particular block, it would just look terrible. And so there's not a clear-cut answer about which should win. As a matter of fact, you may want to just consider within your site. This is why custom blocks are so amazing, because you can just make that block to inherit the style if that's the way you want to do it. And then every time you build a new page or post or even navigation in the future on that site, when you reuse the block, you can actually restrict access to the editing, the style of the header or of the tag or whatever it is. So that way the user doesn't even have that option, and it just inherits it from the theme. So within the Genesis context, it really boiled down to the notion of flexibility, of letting the user choose when styles are inherited, when they're not, In the pro version of Genesis blocks, we actually have the ability to like literally, like with settings, restrict who can edit what blocks and where. Of course, you also have that capability as you build out your own custom blocks in any context. But there is this notion of like, when should the block win and when should the theme win? In our universe, we've really thought about it through the notion of optionality, because the reality is there's so many different kinds of sites and situations. I need to buy my new version of Keyboard Maestro. I got my pop-up there on the screen share.
All right,
Well,
so there are a couple of more questions. I think I'll probably read out them. So one of the questions is like the different layouts that you demonstrated right now, right? So how does the responsiveness work for in this context? Because like when we are previewing something right now, we previewed it on a desktop view, right? But how does the responsiveness work for these? For especially with blocks and sections and layouts.
yeah, so in our case, of course, we have pre-configured all of these. I mean, obviously the blocks and the sections and layouts when block libraries represent pre-designed and pre-optimized blocks. And so the responsiveness is already built into these particular blocks and also in the core blocks. So in our case, we, did all the work for you. Now, within the custom blocks context, of course, you'll have to create that responsiveness within the blocks that you create. But in our case, this was actually already all done. So there's not really much for a user to do when leveraging the sections and layouts, or frankly, even the core blocks, when wanting to address responsiveness.
Awesome. So another question is like, this is related to the custom blocks. Like during the demo, you like were adding the CSS for the demo blocks, right? So is it actually possible in a way to target like or how easy it is to target specific instances, specific fields from a block context? So for example, if a block has 5 fields and one of them is a text box, when we are writing the CSS, should we actually target like the block name and like whatever the div or wrapper and then the text box, or would it be fine to just say text box and the CSS that we have written would automatically be restricted for anything that happens within that block?
I'm going to go back to that video, go back to that section. So this particular product is one that I have not personally used. So the short answer again, Sudhar, sorry, is I don't actually know the answer, but it looks like the user is targeting that.
Based on the block. Yeah, I see that.
Yeah.
For all the CSS, it's been prefixed with the block name. So I'm assuming that that would be like this CSS would apply to every element in the page, but we could restrict it ourselves by just prefixing the block name here.
Yeah, I believe that's true. We actually, so the product was developed internally, again, kind of a fork in a sense of the Block Lab product, essentially over the last month. So what's happened is they're essentially rebranding, expanding that. This plugin will be released, we believe, or at least submitted to WordPress.org on September 1st. It takes anywhere from 2 days to 2 weeks to get the application processed, submission processed. In that time, we're working on documentation and video, course material to help people understand how it works. If you want to play with it now, you can actually just go install Block Lab. Again, the Genesis Custom Blocks is a rebranded and expanded version of that. And so you can actually get your hands dirty today and not have to wait those 2 weeks to give it a shot.
Okay, that's pretty cool. We would definitely want to try it out. So another question related to the Genesis Custom Blocks plugin, right? Do you have any idea about maybe, do you have any idea about like how that plugin would be released? Will it be like a like a pro version, or would it be like a SaaS product, or do you have any idea about it?
Yeah, absolutely. It will be the default version will be free, and I'm gonna show you. Let's see if I can get this right here. Yeah, there we go. I'll show you pretty much the same block lab. There we go. So I'll show you kind of the gist. So again, referencing the block lab, custom blocks made easy. So there'll be a free version. As a matter of fact, there's a free version on .org we can go look at. So this plugin is will eventually be wound down. And when we release Genesis custom blocks, it will include migration tech that is actually quite elegant and easy, that will migrate your blocks from the Block Lab plugin to the custom blocks plugin. And over time, this plugin will eventually be wound down. But just like this one is free and available on WordPress.org, so will Genesis custom blocks. The pro version is, you can actually see the features here, I think. Yeah, so it describes the various features. So we have the repeater field, post field, taxonomy field, so on and so forth. So this is being offered under the Genesis Custom Blocks Pro plugin, which is available at studiopress.com/Genesis Pro. It's basically a pro offering. Today it includes the pro version of Genesis Blocks, which includes a lot more sections and layouts, and also the ability to restrict what users can edit within the block. So this is part of that pro offering. But the pro offering for Genesis Pro will include the Genesis Blocks Pro plugin, the Genesis Custom Blocks Pro plugin, all in one. This subscription also includes access to and support for the Genesis framework and all of the themes. But it's really being housed in this pro offering. But to answer the question on the free thing, absolutely, we will release the Genesis Custom Blocks version as a free plugin on WordPress.org.
Perfect. I think that's pretty cool. So I'm just going to quickly go over the chat to see if I missed any questions. Looks like we have already covered all the questions. There were obviously a couple of people appreciating the presentation.
Well, thank you. I think if you're curious on discussing more about these plugins and just these approaches in general, and getting into the weeds, and also getting direct access to the product and engineering teams working on these particular products, if you go to genesis.community, you can see a link to join the Slack group there. No charge for any of that stuff, of course, but you can join Genesis Slack. Our engineers, product managers, and of course, members from the 350,000 strong Genesis community participate there and nerd out about all this stuff. So if you're looking to continue the conversation, genesis.community, join us on Slack.
Sure, definitely. All right. So I just saw that we don't have any more questions. So I think we have pretty much covered. Do you have anything else to share with us right now?
No, just thank you so much for having me. And I hope the next time I get to join you all for this meetup, I can do it in Chennai.
Oh, that would be really awesome. You're always welcome here.
Thank you, David.
Anyways, that's the glimpse of how we are dealing with the work from home situation, I guess.
I have 3 kids. I can empathize.
All right. Thanks, David. Thanks for taking time and then explaining all this thing to us. I think from our community perspective, we have heard about Gutenberg. We have probably tried a couple of block plugins and maybe the core blogs, but definitely the ability to create new blogs without using React, I think that's something which is pretty new, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people in our community would really appreciate you explaining that.
I'm glad to hear that. And I think as you think about the areas of the block editor you're familiar with, I think again, just to reiterate, what is your time machine going to look like? How are you going to propel your business, your agency, your freelance business forward faster in those projects and make more profit from them? I showed you the tools we use for that.
Mhm.
What are you going to do? I think is the challenge I would put out there as you think about how to leverage the block editor in your business.
Awesome. All right. Thanks again, David. And